All right, welcome back. We're going to be discussing the ad hominem circumstantial fallacy, fallacy number 2. And as we mentioned in the last segment, there's a distinction between the ad hominem abusive fallacy and the ad hominem circumstantial fallacy. Would any of you care to characterize the difference for us one more time?
In the ad hominem circumstantial fallacy, the opponent is discrediting their opponent's situation or affiliation or beliefs or inherited qualities rather than discrediting their actual ideas. This is different in the ad hominem abusive because they aren't being insulting and instead they're discrediting their situation.
Very good. There's the distinction comes then that we're not abusing the individual or the speaker, the source of the argument. In this case, we're discrediting them based on the circumstances surrounding them in some way. Very, very well put. And in the book, the definition that's given, it says that we're discrediting because of background, affiliations, or self-interest. And those are some key categories to be thinking about when you're considering whether or not it is an ad hominem circumstantial. The background of the individual, affiliations. What does affiliations mean?
Like relationships between different things.
Right, relationships relations that the individual has to other people, to organizations, to a set of beliefs or how they were raised, or then their self-interests as well. So let's come up with some examples here. If I were to say, well, of course, Grace wants to. I should have mentioned I might pick on you. Of course, Grace wants us to film our next segment at her house. Obviously, she's just too lazy because she doesn't want to have to get out of bed and get showered and get ready to go like all the rest of us. So, of course, she's going to argue that we film the next segment at her house instead of here at the CAP office. What have I done?
Gone to her circumstances, which maybe her house really is better to film, but you're saying just because of her self-interest, her argument should be discounted. Right. I mean, it's possible that at Grace's home there could be an entire, sound room set up with all the right lighting and, perfect backdrops, and the acoustics could be absolutely perfect, and there could be sort of a mixing board and a sound area that, that it would turn out to be the highest quality video that, we could possibly put together, and I could be overlooking all of that, and that could have been your reasoning for it, but because I don't want to drive all the way over to where Grace lives, I discredit Grace's circumstances and the potential self-interest she might have in wanting to stay home instead of focusing on what the real issue is. And of course, we would have to investigate and think about what the best place to do the videoing is instead of just trying to weasel our way around the issue. And isn't that what we're really doing when we have when we create these kinds of arguments? Isn't it kind of a trick or a lazy way around what the real issue is? Aren't we trying to get around the real issue by introducing some of these irrelevancies? Yeah. So let's look at a couple of other examples for the ad hominem circumstantial. Anybody? I know you have them. You were just telling them to me moments ago.
Well, I have one. What about where people live and come from?
Okay.
Here in the Harrisburg area of Pennsylvania, we have a river running right through the area, the Susquehanna River, and there's an east shore and a west shore. And I don't want to pick on Grace again, but I noticed that she's the only one who lives on the east shore. And I think that explains why she's such an advocate of the renewal of the city of Harrisburg, because the city of Harrisburg is also on the east shore. Mm-hmm. And so if the city is renewed, it accrues certain benefits to her who lives on the east shore. And I've noted that she tends to be a fan of the renaissance of the city of Harrisburg, and it's obviously because she lives over there on the east shore.
Right, sure, she seeks to benefit something.
Yeah. And that's why she's arguing for all that money, that they want to raise taxes, they want to do all these things to improve the downtown area of the city, and that's why.
I think you're only saying that because they will be taxing the west shore for benefits to the east shore, And the only reason you're saying that is because you don't want to be taxed,
Well-
and you're one of the people who lives on the West Shore.
I think the people on the East Shore should bear the burden of the taxes since the city's on the East Shore.
I think you're saying that because you are related to him, so that's the only reason why you are saying that. It's some family conflict.
And I think
There
you're
was a
just saying
fight
that
earlier,
because you
wasn't
wear braces.
Yes. And you have a particular tendency to pick on me, so I think that's right.
Oh, really?
And we can see how the argument fizzles out into something that has absolutely nothing to do with the original argument, which was whether or not, at the crux of what Dr. Perrin was saying, whether or not the East Shore revitalization efforts should or should not be taken up by the citizens of the area. And we dwindled that argument all the way down to whether or not Seth wears braces. So, and perhaps a more animated and overly dramatic and completely superfluous example of this fallacy, you can see how if you continue to try to skirt an issue, by that I mean continue to try to avoid the issue by aiming at the circumstances surrounding an individual or by, of the individual itself, you can very quickly find yourself in just a matter of moments entirely off topic and, discussing something that has absolutely nothing to do with the original argument whatsoever. And isn't that how a lot of arguments do tend to go so often? You find yourself starting with a legitimate debate, a legitimate argument about something, and before you know it, the conversation has spiraled, into nothingness, and you're not on topic anymore at all anyway. So it's important to always, using this as an example, to always refocus and come back to reminding ourselves what is the issue at hand, and are we off topic and somehow, and in which way. You had another example, Seth, when we were talking earlier about, and can you refresh us on what that was?
Yeah. If someone might say, yes, you wouldn't understand our political issues in America because you're from England.
Okay.
And you have a queen, so therefore, you wouldn't actually understand why we do so and so.
Right. And the basis of the argument that Seth is generating is apparently you can only understand the politics and the government of whatever country you happen to live in. So studying other governments, studying other countries is a completely futile endeavor because if you weren't born there and you don't live there, you have no chance of being able to understand the culture, the government, the politics, or anything else. There's just a mental brain block that does not transcend cultures and governments. Is that the argument that you're making?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that would be that be a legitimate argument or an illegitimate argument?
Legitimate.
Of course it would be. It's ridiculous. I mean, people study, some of the, the best thinkers or the best people to perhaps analyze a situation are people who aren't mired in it. So people who don't necessarily feel passionately about who our next congressman or president might be. They might be the perfect person to best understand the situation because they don't have any emotional ties or that sort of thing affecting how they might feel about the situation because feelings can get involved. Okay. Any other examples of ad hominem circumstantial?
Well, a lot of times during abortion debates, men will say that they think the baby's right to life is greater than the woman's right to choice. And if someone were to say, well, you just think that because you're not a girl and you don't know what it's like, and that'd be a fallacy because they are being persuasive by means of discrediting his situation, because gender's kind of a situation, rather than, well, kind of, I don't know.
I've got a situation. I'm a man.
That should be the quote of the day. Gender is a situation.
Okay. But they're discrediting them rather than their beliefs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is the real issue that's being discussed?
Whether or not abortion's correct.
Okay, right. Whether it's ethical or unethical, moral or immoral, to support abortion, to believe in abortion as a woman's right to choose, whether or not it's a life or not a life. There's all kinds of real issues that have to be discussed when we're talking about abortion. To say that there's only, half of the world's population that are eligible to have that conversation because that half happens to be the ones carrying the baby seems a little bit irresponsible and definitely irrational. Right, to say that men can't contribute to the conversation about whether or not it's right or wrong, moral, immoral, ethical or unethical, just because they aren't the ones carrying the baby. Absolutely. So we have to get back to what the real issue is and leave the circumstances of the speaker out of it as we discuss what these different issues are.
Reminds me of these maxim that kind of appears throughout the book, where we might say, respond to that kind of a fallacy by saying it may be true, but it's irrelevant. It may be true that his situation is that he's a man and he can't be pregnant, but it's irrelevant to the issue of whether it's moral or immoral. Let's stay on topic and let's hear the argument and let's deal with the argument.
Exactly. And what would be the motivation for someone to, in this particular case, to use the ad hominem circumstantial? Why would someone choose to say, well, you wouldn't understand, you're not a woman, you don't have to make this choice for yourself?
It's a really easy way to get out of the argument and to, win it. But you're
Right.
not really winning it. But
Exactly. As soon as you say that to a man, or to a young man or to a man, what's their feeling that they're going to feel? What would your feeling be if someone basically told you, what you have to say isn't important at all, and it's not relevant at all because you couldn't possibly. You're a man. You couldn't possibly understand. What's your feeling as a result of that?
Offended, insulted.
Offended or insulted? What else? You have to be thinking, how are you going to get out of that? How do you get out of that? What do you think about it?
You can't really. It's like you're trapped. It's something that you can't really argue about, and the only way to refute it was to know logic and say, well, that's not exactly relevant to the issue. My argument may be good, but that doesn't, just because I am of a certain gender doesn't mean I can't have a good argument here.
Exactly. Right. Go ahead.
You might throw it back at them and say, because you're a woman, you have personal experience or you have bias because you are a woman and cannot look at it from an outside standpoint. So you have a sort of moral bias involved. Therefore, you should not be allowed to comment on it.
So you could hurl it back at them, the ad hominem circumstantial right back at them. It could turn into a snowball fight of sorts.
You could say, how could you possibly be objective about this? You have too much interest wrapped in this to think objectively about it. I could see you reversing it this way, too, in terms of gender as a situation. Like, what if the discussion was about combat and how war should be waged and so on, and if a woman wanted to weigh in about tactics, battlefield tactics, a man might say, well, women don't do that kind of fighting. There are no female Marines who are carrying weapons at the front and firing bazookas and so on. So I don't, you really can't weigh in on this issue because you don't know what it's like, and you'll never experience it yourself. Well, I think the same thing would apply.
Sure. Actually, not to go to Ronald Reagan too many times in one day, but I will use him as another example. He was the oldest president that we ever had in our country as well, and during the debate for his presidency, a comment was made by his opponent saying, something about his age, and, was he going to be, too old to fulfill his responsibilities? Was that going to get in the way of him being able to serve faithfully his country as president of the United States? And his response was, he wasn't going to let his opponent's youth and inexperience be an issue in the debate, and he didn't think that the comments should be, the other side of the issue should be involved in the debate either. And so there's certain circumstances, and so my point in bringing that up is that these sorts of attacks aren't limited to the sort of, the lay person having these types of arguments, that it's elevated even into, the presidential elections and, areas that we think should be above logical fallacy. That people are always trying to get around issues and undercut their opponent by incorporating these different fallacies. We always have to be on the lookout for them.
That reference to age is a good one, because age as well as gender can be a situation, and this, I'm thinking of students and teachers, right? Like, and students and parents, children and their parents. There are times when there's a generation gap arguments, where Mom, you really couldn't understand. You're not 17 anymore, and our generation just thinks differently than your generation did or your generation does. So that would be another attempt to cut someone out of the argument. And it could work the same way, where the parents could say, you know what, when you're older, you will understand this. So you really don't, I can't really listen to your argument, about why you think you should come in a little later on Friday nights. You'll understand when you're older. So to cut off the argument, no discussion, no debate. You're just too immature to even have an opinion about the matter.
Yes. Yep. And you're in the same situation that the boys were in just a moment ago. When you're talking about age, there's absolutely nothing that you can do about the age you happen to be, the gender you happen to be, the way that you happen to look, I guess, short of plastic surgery. And so, there are some things that you're not able to overcome, but they have nothing to do with whether or not you can formulate a good argument and think rationally and logically, and whether or not you can stick to the issues of the debate. And so we have to feel comfortable to bring the argument, bring the discussion back around to what's the real argument here. It's not about whether or not I'm a boy or a girl. It's not about what age I am. It's about what are the reasons behind the argument that you're making. And how confident are you to rationally and calmly, emotionally free, say those sorts of things and bring the argument back around to what's really relevant. All right, I think that'll do it for the ad hominem circumstantial. And we'll be back next time with fallacy number 3, which is
Tu quoque.
tu quoque fallacy.